Hi everyone, welcome to Historically Speaking, an online YouTube history channel focused on the history of various institutions and professionals, how history intersects with education and culture in the world around us. I'm Karen Yang, host of Historically Speaking. Today joining us is Eric Deggans. Eric is NPR's first full-time TV critic, appearing on the network's shows such as Morning Edition and All Things Considered, along with writing for NPR.org and appearing on NPR podcasts such as Life Kit, Code Switch, Pop Culture Happy Hour, and It's Been a Minute. Eric is also an adjunct instructor of journalism and public policy in the Sanford School of Public Policy at Duke University and the chair of the Media Monitoring Committee for the National Association of Black Journalists. Eric, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Do you have anything else you'd like to add to your bio or anything else like that?
No, I think you covered a lot of it.
Yeah, of course. Also love your background, how you highlighted your book that you wrote. It's kind of very conveniently within the shot as well. It's super cool.
Yep.
Yeah. So I really wanted to talk a lot about just media and how media has really shifted how we see each other and how we view the world. So one of my first questions is kind of based on that question or that thought. It's how has mass media changed the way we communicate with each other and digest information?
Well, one of the things that I've noticed about the modern media structure is that it delivers all of this news to your doorstep that normally you might not have ever heard of, or it would have taken you longer to find out about it. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, particularly because people tend to put alerts on their phone and all kinds of messaging. So you're constantly being bombarded with this drip, drip, drip of usually terrible news, usually stuff that agitates you, and usually stuff that makes you kind of lose faith in
Mm-hmm.
people and institutions around you. You'll hear about flooding in Pakistan. You'll hear about governors in certain states sending busloads of immigrants to northern states. You'll hear about undrinkable water in Mississippi. You hear about all these failures of institutions and horrible things that happen to people, and it starts to feel like the world is falling apart because this
Mm-hmm.
social media and our current media structures are constantly bringing this to your door every day. And so it takes some intention and willpower to disconnect from that. Well, number one, to put it in perspective. So even when you're experiencing it, to understand that there's a lot of great things that happen in the world and that um, institutions that surround you take care of you in a lot of ways that you don't necessarily immediately appreciate.
Mm-hmm.
And then also learning how to disengage from that a little bit and maybe not set up your phone so that you get quite so many alerts, or maybe don't put CNN on in the background while you're at work or even while you're at home, because that steady deluge of troubling news events can agitate you and make you feel pretty bad by the end of the day. And if you're particularly if you're somebody who's already maybe struggling with depression or struggling with feelings of gloom and doom, subjecting yourself to that every day is not the best idea. We consume a lot of this stuff without thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just need to put a little intention behind the media that you expose yourself to make sure that you're not unfairly or unduly damaging yourself.
Mm-hmm. I really like how you talked about how a lot of the news that we kind of get bombarded with is not highlighting a lot of the progress or a lot of like necessarily any positive information. And I know that we're slowly kind of realizing that, becoming more cognizant of that. And, I sometimes see on Instagram, there's like accounts dedicated to highlighting like positive wins, I guess, no matter how small they may be. But yeah, I think it has to be something that is super intentional and sometimes that is definitely not on the forefront of our minds, which I think you definitely addressed as well. Um, as like a person who's like super interested in history, and as someone who like you've definitely had so much experience with just looking at history and how history and mass media and media has kind of changed how we view history and the lead up to that. In your opinion, what has really caused the rise of such mass media and such mass media consumption as well?
Well, basically, a media structure has kind of evolved to meet what people require of it. Um, People want to have as much information as possible, as conveniently as possible. So they want to have it on their phone, on their tablet, on their desktop, reachable through their TV, and they want to be able to access it whenever they need it. So that began with all the way back, decades ago when you had TV news report, when you had news reporting on TV, because there was a time when that wasn't that usual, but the broadcast networks realized that people would value having a TV show that sort of summed up the news of the day and told them what was happening in the
Mhm.
same way that an afternoon newspaper would do.
Mhm.
So that started in the 50s and 60s. Uh,
Mhm.
and around, even earlier than that, you had 24-hour news reports on radio.
Mhm.
And then we got to the point where, CNN came along and offered news, a 24-hour news channel. Um,
Mhm.
in the beginning, it wasn't necessarily entirely 24 hours, but
Mhm.
after a while, they got to the point where they were constantly offering news on television, and you had a few radio news channels that were doing the same thing. And then the internet evolved, and we got to have websites that offered a lot of news. And then broadband evolved, and cellular technology evolved, and we started to have that stuff on the phone. And all of it is just this idea of giving people the ability to access news and information whenever they want, however they want. And consumers now have gotten used to that, and they demand it from media products now. So,
Mhm.
so there's this constant demand from the audience for news that is more relevant to their interests and that is easier to access, which
Mhm.
means that you're just bombarded with it more. And
Mhm.
so, even though there are some news outlets and newsletters and apps and websites that are devoted to feel good news, people don't respond to that in the same way. They
Mhm.
that generates
Mhm.
fear, that generates conflict, that generates anger, that generates
Mhm.
may. Those are really strong emotions, and so most of the news services that are out there are offering material that engages those feelings in some kind of way. Even NPR, we're constantly trying to tell you things that you need to know, but those things that you feel like you need to know are sometimes things that are very alarming. So
Mhm. Mhm.
so that's kind of how we've gotten to where we are now. The media platforms out there that are trying to turn a profit are trying to give the audience what they want,
Mhm.
in their framework of whatever they do, and the audience is increasingly demanding that they super serve their interests. Uh,
Mhm.
it used to be, say 25 or 30 years ago, when people watched a broadcaster, they watched ABC or NBC, they didn't
Mhm.
want to sit through a show that they didn't like to see a show that they did like, because they didn't have that many options. And
Mhm.
so, if you turn on ABC and you don't like Happy Days, but Laverne and Shirley is coming on after it, and you like that, then you just sit through Happy Days to get to Laverne and Shirley, and you wouldn't think much of it.
Mhm.
Nowadays, people have no patience for that. They want
Mhm.
to sit through something they don't like to view something that they do like, and the
Mhm.
technology exists so they don't have to do that. You
Mhm.
call up YouTube and you can start the video you want to see uh,
Mhm.
right away, or you call up HBO Max, or you call up Disney Plus, and you just
Mhm.
start video when you want, and you can even hook it up to your TV so the image looks big and bright and detailed. So that's how we've gotten to where we are, and I think managing that is going to require a lot of deep thought and conscious effort on the part of everybody who uses media.
Hmm. I think that something you talked about, or something I noticed kind of a pattern with this, is that we get like a new technology or we get a new product, we kind of become accustomed to it. We're like, oh, this is so innovative. So then we kind of become accustomed to it, and that kind of becomes like the new normal of, whether we get bombarded with all this information in the beginning, we're like, oh, this is so different than the past. And then that becomes something we're expected to kind of interact with on a daily basis. And that's now become the way we consume our news, or the way that we kind of get associated with all of the happenings around the world. And I think that, as you kind of said as well, this can create a lot of really interesting and kind of innovative conversations on how to kind of deal with this and whether or not this is really beneficial for us. And then I kind of wanted to ask, as a result of this kind of rise of mass media, how has it kind of changed the perceptions of ourselves and those who may be, different or located in different parts of the world or have different backgrounds compared to us?
Well, I actually think what is happening in our media universe is that different platforms or services or apps or whatever kind of come to the public, and then the public interacts with them. And then sometimes people figure out a way to sort of include that platform in their media diet or include it in their daily habits, and then it sort of becomes a force in American and in or in world society.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those platforms don't take, they don't necessarily become a part of our lives, or they just they're used by a small segment of people, so
Mm-hmm.
they evolve differently. So
Mm-hmm.
think about something like TikTok, for example, when it first, was accessible to the American public. People at first didn't quite know what to make of it, and it took a little while for people to use the app and view the app until it sort of settled into a place in our pop culture lives and
Mm-hmm.
our media using lives. And
Mm-hmm.
there's another a social media service called Discord
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of gamers use. And,
Mm-hmm.
that never really got. I mean, it's a service and a lot of people use it, but it never got the prominence that
Mm-hmm.
Facebook or Instagram or TikTok got, because it's not as easy to use as any of those. And it was first sort of marketed and promulgated by a very discrete, distinct group of people. And,
Mm-hmm.
and so Discord has evolved differently because it's not as much of a mass product as TikTok is. And
Mm-hmm.
it talks to the point where it's inspiring Instagram and Facebook to create its own versions of TikTok, and people are also grabbing TikTok video and repurposing it and tweeting it out on Twitter or putting it up on websites. So everybody's once that technology kind of hits the public, uh,
Mm-hmm.
figure out different ways to use it, and then consumers figure out which of those ways they really respond to, and then that evolves the service further. So it
Mm-hmm.
really is this it's this interesting and sort of complex dynamic where
Mm-hmm.
it comes out and then people use it and then people consume it and then it evolves and then it settles into a place in our lives, and then that may change. The way
Mm-hmm.
people use and feel about Facebook now is a lot different than the way people use and felt about Facebook in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
Experiences that people had with that election and with misinformation and disinformation has really changed how people use Facebook. And also, I think a lot of younger people have left the platform. So
Mm-hmm.
So the people who are left, the group that is left, they talk to each other differently,
Mm-hmm.
because younger people, use Instagram and TikTok a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
So with all that said, it's easy to be simplistic and sort of say that people are narrowing their consumption to these silos and surrounding themselves with ideas that they agree with. But um, I think it's a little more complex than that. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think what's happening is that everybody's kind of on their own media journey.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, that journey involves surrounding themselves with like-minded voices and like-minded ideas. And for some people,
Mm-hmm.
that journey means, putting together this disparate collection of platforms and ideas and personalities,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what they respond to. And in some ways, it's isolating
Mm-hmm.
because people are narrowing in on the things that only they are interested in. But in some
Mm-hmm.
ways, it brings us together because you can post something on Twitter about something obscure that you really love, and all of a sudden you hear from 200 people from across the world who also love that obscure thing that you thought you were the only person who liked.
Mm-hmm.
And that used to happen a lot, I think, when these platforms were new, when Twitter was new, and when Facebook was new. But it still happens now. People still find community and commonality across distances and across different walks of life and different classes, uniting around things like they like the same comic book, or they like the same musical artist, or they have a similar attraction to a certain kind of film or a certain filmmaker. So um, I think it's too simplistic to say that this technology is isolating us. In some ways, it is.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
In some ways, it's also encouraging us to connect with other people over these. One of the things that we found, for example, in fictional television, one of the things we found is that if you create a show that is very culturally specific, it winds up being something that appeals to a wide range of people because you're also
Yeah.
the humanity of whatever it is you're focused on. So, The Sopranos, for example, was a classic, much admired TV show about an Italian American family, and it was
Mm-hmm.
culturally specific about that Italian American family.
Mm-hmm.
Though they were in the mob, and there were some things about that situation that were kind of fantastical, they tried to be very realistic about how the father reacted, how the wife reacted, how the kids reacted, how their friends reacted, what their whole neighborhood culture was like, what their family culture was like, what their work culture was like. It was all very culturally specific, so people could watch it and they could learn about a culture they didn't know that much about, but they could also see, oh, the mom in that family reacts in some ways
Yeah.
my mom did, or the kids in that family, I felt that way as a kid sometimes. So I think that happens in social media too, where you might get very specific about your interests or about something that you're paying attention to, a media platform that you're paying attention to, but there's a commonality there. There's a humanity there too,
Mm-hmm.
that can connect you to other people, and so that's why it's so important for us to keep our minds open when it comes to the impact of these platforms and not make snap judgments about how they're affecting us, because I think in a lot of ways they can have contradictory effects
Mm-hmm.
on us at the same time, and trying to figure out what that means, something that encourages you to go down a media rabbit hole but also connects you to a bunch of other people who are going down the same rabbit hole with you. Like, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
And I don't think we really know yet. It's going to take us a while to discover what that really means.
When you talked about kind of the idea of that TV show, I immediately thought of a TV show that's really popular among I guess kids my age, which is like Never Have I Ever on Netflix. And there are so many different examples of just, kind of these shared, I think, shared like American experience also of being like an immigrant or being kind of an outsider within this traditional societal structure. And I feel like a lot of different people, regardless of maybe their cultural or racial background, can always find a note or an element of something in there that they really resonate with. And as you said, it kind of is contradictory. It feels so isolating sometimes to just type everything out on your own little keyboard and kind of send it out into the great wide world. But at the same time, seeing people engage with your content or seeing people engage with something you're really, really interested in also creates a kind of sense of community that we never would have had if we didn't have this kind of idea of mass media as well.
Yep, that's very true. One show I was thinking about that was also along those lines was Ms. Marvel on Disney Plus. And that was a show that was really detailed in how it depicted this Pakistani American girl delving into her family history, which stretched all the way back to the partition where Britain separated Pakistan and India. And so you learn, if you didn't know much about it, you learned a lot about that history, but you also saw this young teenage girl who wasn't rejecting the culture of her family, but was just trying to figure out her place in it. She was trying
Mhm.
to balance her life as a modern teenage girl with the traditions of her family in an environment where her family was pretty understanding about that. And, they weren't dogmatic about you have to do this or you have to do that. There were expectations of her, but she had those expectations for herself too. And I think
Mhm.
that's a much more realistic um, struggle that some people go through, where
Mhm.
trying to live up to the cultural expectations of their family, but they also want to live in the modern world, and they want to fit in with their friends. And how
Mhm.
two things coexist. And so everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people can relate to that, whether
Mhm.
they're Pakistani American. So
Mhm.
um, that's what great television does. But I also think, that's what media kind of does is it can show you this very specific thing, but you can feel that if it's done well and it's authentic, there's a humanity embedded in there that also comes through that connects you. So you're learning and you're also identifying with the people at the same time. And that it's important for us to remember that is possible, and that
Mhm.
we don't have to completely reject social media in order to save our communities or to connect with each other.
That is such a really, really impactful like ending point on that because I definitely feel that, as we kind of mentioned, we've always a lot of people partly rightly so, believe that, social media and how much time we're spending on our phones and how much time we spend interacting with technology as a whole is what kind of has led to certain, ideologies being spread or certain problems that have been kind of divisive. But I also think that we also do have to remember that, media also plays such a huge part in forming our own humanity and relating that humanity to other people. And that, that ability kind of transcends anything we can kind of do in the physical sense of the world, but means that you can connect with someone kind of halfway across the world and vice versa, which is super, super important.
Yeah, exactly. It is it's easy to come up with sort of snap judgments about how this stuff is affecting us, and I think it's just going to take time. I mean, we had a civil war in this country, long before we had social media. And so I think in some ways, while these media outlets are exacerbating some of our tensions, they're also making it harder for demagogues to say something that's not true and not have somebody rise up to debunk what they're saying.
Mm.
And Ken Burns has a really interesting documentary that's going to be on PBS talking about the U.S. and the Holocaust and how America actually reacted as Hitler started to take power in Germany and then started to oppress the Jewish citizens there and ultimately kill them. And what comes through is that there was a lot of misinformation about Jewish people that was allowed to stand because there wasn't a lot of media outlets or platforms out there that could push back. So when Hitler first took power, one of the first things they did was crack down on international journalists that were working in Germany. They didn't want reporters telling the world what they were doing to Jewish people in the country, and
Mhm.
so they either made international journalists toe the line and go along with German propaganda, or they pressured them to leave the country. And there were anti-Semites inside the State Department in America who were resisting allowing Jewish people to enter the country and were also resisting efforts to spread word about what was happening in Germany. And there were anti-Semites who were powerful media figures who also were spreading lies about Jewish people. And so, even though the Hollywood film studios, for example, many of them were run by Jewish executives, they were afraid to get too involved because they thought if it looked too obvious, if it seemed too obvious that Jewish people controlled film studios that were spreading a message to push back against anti-Semitism, that people would react negatively to it. It would make it worse, and then it would make things more dangerous for them. So
Mhm.
you had a situation where all these media outlets and platforms that could have told the world what was happening to Jewish people sooner and sort of galvanized the reaction to it, they were all kind of suppressed, and there weren't that many to begin with. Nowadays, what social media does is that it removes the power of the gatekeepers to limit messages, and it allows
Mhm.
individual people to put information out there that anyone can respond to. So
Mhm.
it makes it harder for an authoritarian like Putin, for example, to spread all these lies about the Ukrainian people before he starts an offensive in the country and have the world go along with it, because there's too many other outlets of information that are debunking what he's trying to say. And of course, the people of Russia don't have access to a lot of them, but they have
Mhm.
access to some of them. And so it has been much harder for Putin to do the kind of thing that, frankly, Hitler succeeded in doing, attacking neighboring countries and taking them over before people realized exactly what was going on. People knew exactly what Putin was doing because so many media outlets and
Mhm.
were spreading word about what he was doing, even while he was massing forces along the Ukrainian border. So, so again, it's easy to sort of look at our current media structure and say all the negative things about it, but
Mhm.
it has also made it a little harder for authoritarians to dictate their own history
Mhm.
because many platforms out there that will have a counter narrative or will push back or will feature people who are dissident voices.
For sure, like definitely like media is still such a powerful tool to kind of we always talk about or think about the idea of like yeah, I think definitely people were obsessed with the idea of like canceling one another online, but to a certain extent, the media kind of has that effect on, you know, certain regimes or has that capability to expose the truth. While, canceling is another kind of form of that. I do think that this traditional kind of way that we've seen in history and brought into today is super, super important and, deserves to continue being highlighted.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah. That's all the questions I have for today. Is there anything else you'd like to add about anything or any like promotional materials you want me to kind of highlight as well?
Well, you can encourage people to pick up my book, which you can see over my shoulder there, called Race Baiter: How Media
Hmm.
Most Dangerous Wars to Divide a Nation. It was published about 10 years ago, but What I was doing was trying to document how some media outlets were using prejudice and stereotypes to galvanize audiences and make money and keep those audiences from going to other less racist and prejudiced platforms. And a lot of the things that I describe in the book have come to fruition in the years since. And so you can get a sense of the early seeds of how a lot of this stuff got started. There's a whole chapter on how Fox News uses racial panic and stereotypes about non-white people to galvanize their older audience. There's a part in the book where I talk about how Sean Hannity tried to whip up hysteria about critical race theory, almost 10 years before it actually became a winning strategy for conservatives. I have an interview with Andrew Breitbart, who founded Breitbart.com, one of the most notable conservative websites. I interviewed him 5 months, I think 5 months before he died. 5 weeks. It might have been 5 weeks before he died. I think, yeah, it might have been 5 weeks before he died. To talk about the website. He had established a network of websites actually, and they were in the process of blending them into one. And I think that happened after his death, and they became the platform we know now as Breitbart.com. So there's a lot in the book that can, for people who are interested in history, there's a lot in the book that can tell you about the history of how we got to be to where we are with some of these media platforms, how Fox News got to where it is, how Rush Limbaugh became what he was, how Bill O'Reilly became what he was, and how we can talk to each other across racial lines about disturbing subjects about racism and prejudice in ways that's constructive and ways that's galvanizing and ways in which we connect with each other rather than ways that are disruptive and angry and negative.
Thank you so much. I'll make sure to link that book into the description. And it feels like, in a way, it's kind of your like foreseeing the future, which unfortunately has come true. But yeah, thank you again so much for having this really great conversation with me. Yeah, it was just such a pleasure. And to everyone watching at home, thank you so much, and I will see you next time.